Hello, podcast listeners. The Buzz is currently on hiatus, but we wanted to introduce you to a brand new AZPM original podcast, Navigating Our Financial Times. If you like this episode and want to hear more, you can find it where you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Hello, my name is Nicole Cox. I'm the radio program director of AZPM. Thank you for joining us for Navigating Our Financial Times. This program is not intended to provide investment, tax, or financial advice. You should consult your own tax, legal, and accounting advisors before engaging in any transaction. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not imply an endorsement or recommendation or necessarily reflect the views of AZPM.
The following podcast is an AZPM original production. Due to the rapidly changing nature of the economy, we want you to know that this conversation was recorded on May 7th, 2025.
The economy drives conversation, planning for the future, and reflection upon where we've been. Who better to join me on this economic journey than nationally recognized journalist and broadcaster Linda O'Brien, founding executive editor of Nightly Business Report, a program on public television she co-anchored for Daily for more than a decade, and more recently, former president and CEO of South Carolina ETV and SC Public Radio. Thank you, Linda, for joining us today.
Thank you, Nicole. It's great to be here.
To take a deeper dive into Arizona's economy, joining us here in the AZPM studio is George Hammond, the University of Arizona's director of the Economic and Business Research Center in the Eller College of Management. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We'll start with our first question. U.S. economic growth slowed sharply in the first quarter of 2025, making it the worst quarterly performance for the U.S. economy since early 2022. For Arizona, real estate, rentals, and the leasing industry contribute the most to Arizona's GDP. What does the economy and the housing market for Arizona look like right now? Are we somewhat insulated due to the impact that those industries have, or has there been a deceleration?
Arizona has experienced a significant deceleration, and this really started last year for the state. Our job growth was surprisingly slow at about the national pace. Jobs are down over the years so far this year. I think that will kind of gradually ease, and we will see job growth this year, assuming the national economy avoids recession. Overall, Arizona's economy is fairly well balanced. We're not too different from the national average at this stage. So I don't think we're, exposed to any kind of major housing downturn that will happen. I don't think we're headed for a housing downturn. Overall, housing permits were up a little bit last year, or roughly flat last year. But we saw really strong growth in housing permits, particularly single-family housing permits. Multifamily was down, and that's a really volatile sector. So overall, the state economy is doing okay. Not as good as we are used to seeing, but we are overall generating income growth, and we will see job growth this year.
George, I'm going to jump in here about travel, which is an important industry for Arizona. Travel demand is down right now. There is a decline in international tourism, which is considered a service export. Canada is the second largest source of international visitors to Arizona behind Mexico. That being said, this is the time when things do slow down in tourism. Can you share what forecasters are predicting and how we'll see things go out in the coming year in terms of travel?
The travel sector is a key part of the state economy, and certainly Mexican visitors and Canadian visitors are a key part of the overall tourism picture. Tourism-related jobs last year did a little bit better than we thought in the preliminary data, so that sector held up pretty well last year. I think that in terms of what to expect for this year, that's one of the sectors that's where there's a lot of uncertainty about what we'll actually see. And, a lot depends on how the policy environment evolves over the next year, how the national economy does over this year. So I think you're seeing forecasts that are kind of all over the spectrum, depending on what people think is happening with the U.S. economy. I do think that we'll see a bit of a pullback in terms of international tourism to the state this year. The big question is, will that be offset or cushioned by travel and tourism spending from people within the U.S.? And that's going to depend a lot on what happens with the national economy. Can the U.S. economy stay out of a recession? And that's about a 50-50 chance at this stage.
More semiconductor chip plants are planned for Arizona. In March of 2024, then President Joe Biden announced at Intel's campus in Chandler billions in grants and loans for Intel to expand in Arizona, Ohio, and New Mexico. In April 2025, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick toured the site where Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company broke ground on a third facility in North Phoenix. Can you discuss the impact this will have on jobs and growth, both short-term and long-term, with Arizona becoming a chip-making hub?
The semiconductor facilities that have been constructed and will be constructed will generate significant job growth in the manufacturing sector here in Arizona. Those are relatively high-paying jobs. It's also likely that we'll see the supply chains for those sectors locate closer to them, some of them locating here in Arizona. So I think at this stage you have to be optimistic about manufacturing activity in Arizona and manufacturing job growth over the next couple of years.
And even currently, some of the construction jobs that are being created in the Phoenix area.
Absolutely. Construction job growth was strong last year, and I think we'll see that growth sustained as we look forward over the next couple of years.
And on that line, according to Bloomberg, TSMC, the main chip maker for Apple and NVIDIA, is calling this the single largest foreign investment in U.S. history. Commerce Secretary Lutnick appeared on CNBC and credited Trump's tariff policy for this additional investment. Is the timing of this significant ahead of potential impacts from tariffs?
Well, tariffs have complicated impacts on the economy. One of the impacts that tariffs can have is to incentivize manufacturing activity and manufacturing output in the host country, or the U.S. in this case. But one thing that I would stress about that, which is a more general point than just the semiconductor factories, is that when firms invest in new manufacturing plant and equipment, they tend to invest at the state of the art. These tend to be highly automated plants. So while the tariffs may incentivize manufacturing output to locate in the U.S., that's likely to be highly automated, and I think we'll see a smaller job impact than some in the current federal administration are hoping for.
Due to robotics and AI and those sorts of things with the technology?
Exactly.
Job growth was stronger than expected in April, and the unemployment rate stayed at 4.2%. with healthcare continuing to be a leader in job creation. In addition to the TSMC expansion plants, the Mayo Clinic has plans for growth. It's set to invest $1.9 billion to expand its campus in Phoenix. This is strong news for Phoenix, but I also think of other areas of Arizona. Can you discuss the overall pace of jobs, population, and personal income for the state?
Yes. One thing that we saw last year was that even though overall job growth was, relatively slow really across the state, including Phoenix, the sector that drove job gains was healthcare. So healthcare is a sector that tends to be strong even if the national economy experiences a recession. And I think we'll see strong healthcare job growth going forward really across the state.
Does that have anything to do with the number of retirees we have or just families? What is that? What's the connection there?
It has to do with the demographics of the U.S. and Arizona economies, which are both getting older, and that is driving some of the growth that we're seeing in healthcare. The other major factor is that as economies get more and more wealthy, consumers tend to spend a smaller share of their income on goods like TVs, automobiles, tangible things, and a larger share on intangible things like healthcare, recreation, legal services, educational services. So it's all kind of tied up with that. But that's certainly a sector that I think will be strong going forward.
That is very interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing
Yes,
that.
Absolutely. The sectors where I don't think we'll see much job growth going forward are professional and business services, which is a kind of a catch-all category. It includes accountants, lawyers, management consultants, CEOs would be in that sector, call centers, engineers, computer scientists would also be there. But there's also a major sector, which is services to businesses and buildings, sort of janitorial services. And we've seen that be really weak across the state over the past year. And it looks like some of that was connected to the winding down of some of the sort of holding facilities for undocumented immigrants crossing the border. And as those flows have really slowed down, we've seen some of those jobs also get wound down. So I think the higher tech sectors will see those jobs come back. But as undocumented immigration remains low going forward, which I think we'll see for at least the next couple of years, probably won't see those sorts of jobs coming back.
Arizona's exports, especially to Mexico, are an important part of the economy. Can you explain just how important exports and imports are to Arizona and what this tariff overhang means to the state?
Yes. So, tariffs will affect the economy in a number of ways. It will affect importers and exporters in the state of Arizona. As a share of our GDP, imports and exports together account for about 12% of Arizona's GDP. Ranks us about 31st in the nation. So, Arizona isn't particularly exposed to shocks affecting our exporters or even our importers. But we are very exposed to imports and exports to Mexico. And there, that accounts for about 4% of our GDP, which ranks us 6th in the nation. So it's really that trade relationship with Mexico that's much more important to Arizona than it is to most other states in the U.S. But even so, that sort of impact on the state economy is fairly small. Where we do get impacted by tariffs is the same way it affects the national economy. Tariffs are taxes. And as a significant tax increase, which is what we've seen with the tariffs that are currently set to go into effect or are already in effect, those are a major tax increase. And that means that households have less income to spend after paying those taxes. And furthermore, businesses that are importing goods to use in the production process are facing higher costs. And that's really where the impact on Arizona's economy will be. And we face that risk and that impact to about the same degree that the national economy does.
And what is your sense in Arizona about those importers when they start recognizing those taxes? Are they going to pass them along to the consumer, or will they try to absorb them?
Yes. So the tariffs are collected by the importer or the importer's agent and remitted to the federal government. But who bears the burden of the taxes? Whether it's the consumer or the producer or the importer or the person who's exporting to the U.S., that tends to be a nuanced answer. So it really depends on the industry's structure for the particular good that is being imported or the particular good that's being sold to consumers after being manufactured in the U.S. using those imported inputs. So for any particular good, I can't tell you off the top of my head how that's going to work out. But we do know that on average, the tariffs will result in higher price levels. So we're going to see a short-run burst of inflation followed by higher price levels, both for consumer goods and industrial goods, that will linger. Just like the inflation dynamics we went through with the burst of inflation we saw in 2022, and then we saw those elevated price levels really last going forward, and they'll continue to be high going forward from the tariffs as well.
When I think of the imports and exports, the two that come to my mind immediately are for imports, tomatoes, exports, copper, for example. You spoke a little bit about the impact the tariffs would have. Can you give us a little bit of a broader view of what kind of goods would be most affected by this?
Yes. So Mexico is by far our most important trading partner. In terms of both exports and imports, Mexico accounts for about 28% of our imports and exports from the world. What we export to Mexico is copper. We also export a large amount of computer and electronic components and transportation equipment. So there, I think auto parts and aircraft parts. And the electric components and transportation equipment, or auto parts and aircraft parts, those are part of the shared production system that we have. So those two components are also a big part of our imports from Mexico. These are essentially parts that cross the border multiple times as part of that production process. Our imports from Mexico are really dominated by agricultural products. So that's the fresh produce. And of course, that includes tomatoes, as you mentioned, but also cucumbers, peppers, even grapes are key imports from Mexico. So those are the goods that would be most heavily impacted as far as our trade relationship with Mexico. With respect to China, which is also a major trading partner, there it's really electrical components. So, small parts that are used in other goods that need those electric components. And, those are where we're looking at very significant cost increases and supply disruptions.
Consumers have gotten so used to going to the grocery store and finding tomatoes and all these products that you mentioned almost at any time of the year. How much will consumers around the country be impacted by possible shortages?
Yes, we will face increased risks of not only much higher prices, but shortages across a range of goods that we're used to importing. So that's going to be something that will have to see how that actually plays out. The uncertainty associated with the tariff policies seems to change from day to day and week to week. Is difficult for everyone, including economists trying to figure out what the impacts will be. But certainly, if the so-called reciprocal tariffs that were originally proposed were to be implemented, we would be looking at significantly higher prices and probably product shortages. Even with the reduced levels of tariffs that we're seeing at the moment, those are significant disruptions to supply chains, and that very well could result in empty shelves and certainly higher prices.
We're also hearing from small businesses that they may be impacted because they don't have the ability to either switch suppliers or be able to absorb these higher costs in the terms of tariffs as taxes, as you say. What are you hearing about small business in Arizona?
I'm hearing much the same things that you are, it sounds like. Small businesses typically have less robust supply chains. They tend to get more focused in on a particular chain and have fewer options, and to quickly resource the goods that they are either need to produce their good or something that they need to sell. So this is one of the many reasons why economists think tariffs are a bad idea, and in particular tariffs that are introduced across the board and at very high levels and essentially overnight are a terrible idea.
Changing direction a bit here, George. Executive orders connected to immigration have been in the news lately. Arizona law basically makes sanctuary cities illegal in the state. And of course, E-Verify, the federal database, confirms employment of new hires. Immigrants and undocumented labor has been a significant part of the state's economy. Can you discuss the impact of immigrants and undocumented labor for the state's economy?
Yes. The Pew Research Center estimates that there are about 190,000 undocumented immigrants working or in Arizona's labor force. That's about 5% of our labor force. That's similar to the national average. The industries that primarily rely on undocumented workers tend to be in the construction and agriculture sectors. So the threat of mass deportations is a significant threat to national and state economic growth. If you think about for a state like Arizona, where our unemployment rate is around 4%, which is very low. The labor force participation rate for the population, the prime age, working age population, is very high. If we start to lose significant numbers of workers from our labor force, that is going to be a major shock, probably a bigger shock than we would suffer from the tariffs as currently envisioned. We would face significant supply chain issues, major increases in prices for goods, and major shortages of goods and services across the state and across the nation. So that's a very big deal. So it's another source of uncertainty for businesses that are thinking about expanding.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. You're saying that the impact it would have on the state's economy, immigrants and undocumented labor, would be greater than tariffs.
Yes, that is my opinion. So, if we were to lose up to 5% of our labor force over a short period of time, that would be an extremely severe shock to the state economy.
I guess if you were just going to project out in the next year, knowing what you know, what are you thinking? How is it looking for the overall economy?
If the U.S. economy can avoid a recession, I think Arizona will see growth this year that will be similar to what we saw last year. So another year of unusually slow growth. But I think once we get past 2025 and into 2026 and 2027, we'll see growth begin to pick up some steam. If the U.S. economy does experience a moderate recession, I think that will, generate a situation where Arizona sees no job growth, very little income growth again this year. But as we get into 2026, growth rebounds again. So overall, the risks, I think, around tariffs and the economic uncertainty around tariffs is a short-run risk. Arizona's growth in the longer term, I think, would bounce back and be much stronger than we would see nationally. So overall, I'm optimistic about the Arizona economy in the medium and long run. But both for the U.S. and for Arizona, the risks for this year and if things get delayed into early next year are really significantly elevated, and these are some of the highest risks of recession that we've seen, in 4 or 5 years.
Thank you.
But long term, a positive opinion, positive outlook from George Hammond for the long term.
Yes, Arizona is well positioned to grow and grow faster than the U.S. over the longer run.
George Hammond, the University of Arizona's Director of Economic and Business Research Center in the Eller College of Management, who will serve as the keynote speaker for the UA Eller College of Management's June 3rd Breakfast with the Economists at the Westin La Paloma in Tucson. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
For AZPM, I'm Nicole Cox.
And I'm Linda O'Brien. Thank you for being with us as we make our way through this journey together, navigating our financial times.
This program is not intended to provide investment, tax, or financial advice. You should consult your own tax, legal, and accounting advisors before engaging in any transaction. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not imply an endorsement or recommendation or necessarily reflect the views of AZPM.